Few artists in the history of painting can match the contribution of the Venetian Giovanni Bellini. Bellini can be credited with bringing a humanistic quality to his religious and mythical scenes. He was also at the vanguard of developments in oil painting and, having dispensed of the egg and water tempera method, he used oil paints to evoke a heightened sense of scenic ambience. Whereas the painted landscape was generally viewed with a stuffy disdain by the artistic elite, Bellini treated it with a respect and attention to detail that brought it, though much later, a new generic credibility. And, quite apart from his own magnificent contribution to the canon of the Renaissance, he tutored Titian, who, remarkably, even surpassed his grand and graceful Venetian master. Scant written evidence exists as to the specifics of Giovanni Bellini's childhood. The 16th century artist and biographer Giorgio Vasari recorded in his book Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors and Architects that Bellini was 90 when he died, making 1426 his year of birth. But contemporary art historians believe that it is more likely that he was born a little later, sometime between 1430 and 1432. His parenthood has also been disputed, with recent claims being made by art historian Daniel Maas that Jacopo Bellini long considered his father was in fact his elder brother. There is no dispute, however, over the fact that the artist was born in Venice. Jacopo was himself an artist, though now better known thanks to the enduring celebrity of his more famous sons, who were much admired in Venice and indeed all over northern Italy. As their numerous correspondences attest, Giovanni was close to his brother Gentile, and the two learnt the skills of drawing and painting together under the tutelage of their father. The Bellini brothers benefited early on from their father's extensive travels throughout Italy, especially Florence and other Tuscan towns which were seeing advances in anatomical studies and perspective. Though Venice was not a seat of learning, the city still gave the young brothers the best of starts as artists. It was, after all, one of the richest and best-governed capitals in the world, with a seemingly voracious appetite for beautiful and extravagant art. In 1443, Bellini accompanied his father on a working trip to Padua. Whilst there, it is likely the impressionable teenage boy witnessed the preaching of Saint Bernardino. In the more southern reaches of modern-day Italy, there had been a blossoming of Renaissance humanism and a move away from Christianity, a school of thought to which Jacopo himself had ascribed. Saint Bernardino led a powerful resurgence of religious fervor in the country during the middle of the 15th century, often preaching for hours in the open air with eloquence and passion on the virtues of the Christian faith. It is very likely that this was the event that began what was to be for Giovanni a lifelong and deep devotion to the Christianity. Despite having two such promising protégés as sons, Jacopo was keen to expand his school, and having noticed the precocious talent of the young artist Andrea Mantegna on a visit to Padua in the early 1450s, he promptly arranged the marriage of Mantegna to his daughter, Nicolosa. Bellini found himself with a new brother-in-law, and Mantegna was to exert a profound effect on Giovanni's practice. It would seem that the relations between the two were exceedingly amicable, and although Mantegna moved to Mantua in 1460, they continued a productive relationship for the rest of Mantegna's lifetime. In the years before 1460, Bellini's work shows an intensity and religious feeling that seems to be entirely his own. Art historian Roger Fry, writing in 1899, describes how Jacopo's religious sketches treated religious subjects with surprising levity, whereas in the work of his son, the feelings of pity and love are expressed with such frequency and with such intimate intensity as to make his devotion palpable. It was with the same devotion that he committed himself to mastering the developments in rendering the human figure, perhaps because of his early life in the university town of Padua, or perhaps because of his more extrovert nature. It makes sense that Mantegna was the one to lead the way for Bellini in this Paduan school of painting. His influence on his brother-in-law is clear when comparing the two men's work before 1460. In addition to his brother-in-law, one sees clear links to the work of the Florentine sculptor and painter Donatello, who had spent time in Padua between 1440 and 1450. The influence of the painter Carlo Crivello is also evident in his early work. Crivello was in fact a student of the only alternative school of painting to the Bellinis in Venice, the Vivarinis. A rivalry grew up between the two schools, and this competitiveness acted as a spur for Bellini, who took it upon himself to stay abreast of artistic developments beyond Venice. Yet despite this local rivalry, Bellini is also credited with an openness and generosity with other artists. Giovanni Bellini's Saint Jerome in the Desert is universally recognized as his earliest surviving work, created when he was about 16, around 1450. Painted in egg tempera on wood and housed at the Barber Institute of Fine Arts in Birmingham, England, this work captures a pivotal moment in the Italian Renaissance, where Gothic influences began merging with emerging Renaissance techniques. The painting portrays Saint Jerome, a central figure in Christian history known for his translation of the Bible into Latin, seated semi-naked on a rock in front of his cave in the Syrian desert. Bellini carefully balances Jerome's solitary figure with the expansive, desolate environment. The rugged, barren landscape composed of craggy rocks and a distant, hazy horizon creates a powerful sense of depth and isolation, reinforcing Jerome's ascetic lifestyle and deep spiritual devotion. In this intimate setting, Saint Jerome holds a book in his left hand, a clear reference to his life as a hermit and his significant role in producing the Vulgate Bible. His faithful lion, an enduring symbol associated with Jerome, is depicted in front of him. The saint appears to be blessing the animal, and notably the lion retains the famous thorn on its paw, a legendary mark said to have been removed by Jerome himself. This detail not only enriches the narrative but also underscores the themes of healing and divine mercy. Bellini's masterful manipulation of egg tempera allows for nuanced transitions between light and shadow, creating delicate gradations that suggest an early morning or late afternoon setting. The interplay of golden sky tones with the earthy hues of the rocky terrain evokes a subtle tension between divine illumination and earthly suffering. Every meticulous detail, from the intricate textures of the rocks to the soft illumination on Jerome's figure, contributes to a composition that is both serene and profoundly introspective. Overall, Saint Jerome in the Desert exemplifies Bellini's early exploration of naturalistic detail and atmospheric depth. By blending the meticulous realism of the Gothic tradition with the emerging principles of Renaissance perspective and naturalism, Bellini laid the foundation for the rich, expressive quality that would later come to define Venetian painting. Giovanni Bellini's The Madonna and Child is a tempera-on-panel painting, typically dated between 1450, 1460 or, according to Pignati, between 1450-1455. Housed in the Pinacoteca Malaspina in Pavia, this work stands as an early yet significant example of Bellini's evolving artistic style, exemplifying the transition from the Gothic tradition to the emerging Renaissance ideals of naturalism, human emotion, and depth. The painting features the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child, a subject deeply rooted in Christian iconography. Mary's solemn and contemplative expression conveys a sense of maternal devotion intertwined with a foreknowledge of Christ's future sacrifice. Bellini renders her with a delicate balance between tenderness and solemnity, a characteristic that would later define his mature style. The child, depicted in a naturalistic pose as he rests against his mother, emphasizes the Renaissance shift toward portraying sacred figures with enhanced humanity and emotional resonance. One of the most striking aspects of this painting is its use of light and color. Bellini applies soft transitions of shading, moving away from the rigid linearity of the earlier Gothic tradition. The modeling of the figures demonstrates an early understanding of sfumato, creating a gentle atmospheric effect that enhances their realism. The subtle gradation of tones in Mary's veil and the child's skin foreshadows the luminous, color-rich compositions that would later come to define Venetian painting. The background remains simple, with a dark or neutral tone that isolates the figures and directs attention to their emotional connection. This compositional choice echoes the influence of the Vivarini school, whose work, along with that of his father Jacopo, greatly influenced Bellini during the 1450s. The general composition is also based on a widely copied Byzantine icon in Venice, while the strong, defining line used for the Christ child reflects the influence of Francesco Squarcione and his studio on the young Bellini. The work was first attributed to Bellini by Giovanni Battista Cavalcasella, and this view has been largely supported by subsequent scholars such as Huse and Peroni, 1981. However, there has been some debate over the authenticity of the signature on the parapet. Morelli considered it dubious and attributed it to Vivarini, while Heinemann, 1962, and Robertson, 1968, proposed alternative attributions to Lazzaro Bastiani. In The Madonna and Child, Bellini not only adheres to the devotional function of Marian imagery, but also infuses it with a newfound sense of intimacy and depth. His exploration of human expression and form marks an important step in the progression of Renaissance art, bridging the linear elegance of the Gothic style with the warmth and naturalism of the Venetian school. Giovanni Bellini's The Transfiguration is a tempera-on-panel painting created between circa 1454 and 1460. Currently housed in the Museo Carrara in Venice, this work depicts the biblical episode of Christ's Transfiguration, a moment of divine revelation recounted in the Synoptic Gospels, in which Jesus is transformed in radiant glory before his disciples on Mount Tabor. As one of Bellini's early religious compositions, the Transfiguration exemplifies his emerging style, which fuses influences from Byzantine iconography, the Paduan school, and the evolving Venetian Renaissance. The painting is structured with a balanced yet dynamic composition. At the center, Christ stands elevated on the mount, his arms slightly raised in a gesture of divine manifestation. He is clad in a radiant white robe, symbolizing his divine nature and the moment of transfiguration. A luminous aura envelops him, reinforcing his spiritual transformation. Flanking him are the Old Testament prophets Elijah and Moses, who appear as witnesses to this divine event. Below them, the three apostles Peter, James, and John are depicted in varied postures of awe and reverence, blinded by the overwhelming vision. The contrast between Christ's serene, frontal stance and the disciples' agitated movements creates a sense of narrative tension, drawing the viewer into the mystical experience. Bellini's use of color and light is particularly striking in this work. The warm, golden tones that bathe the scene suggest divine illumination, while the delicate modeling of the figures indicates his early exploration of chiaroscuro. Although his technique here remains somewhat linear and influenced by Gothic traditions, the soft gradation of tones and atmospheric depth foreshadow the signature Venetian approach to light and color that Bellini would later perfect. The landscape setting reflects a transition from the rigid, patterned backgrounds of Byzantine art toward a more naturalistic representation of space. The rocky terrain and distant hills provide a sense of depth, while the subtle use of perspective helps to position the figures within a tangible environment. This integration of sacred figures into a convincing landscape was an innovative step in Venetian painting and anticipates Bellini's later works, where nature plays a more prominent role in devotional imagery. Andrea Mantegna was staying in Venice at the time, and his influence on Bellini remained strong. This is particularly evident in the sculptural quality of the figures, the rigid drapery folds, and the dramatic contrasts of light and shadow. Mantegna's classical approach, derived from his training in the Paduan school, can be seen in the solidity and monumentality of Christ and the prophets. The connection between the two artists was so pronounced that a false set of initials in the lower right-hand corner of the painting led to its misattribution to Mantegna for a time. The painting's provenance remains uncertain before 1830. That year, Teodoro Carrara bequeathed it to the city of Venice, but before doing so, he had destroyed all documentation related to its previous ownership and history, leaving a significant gap in its recorded past. Despite its traditional iconographic roots, the Transfiguration demonstrates Bellini's early attempts to humanize religious scenes. The apostles' expressions and gestures convey genuine emotional responses, moving beyond the static solemnity of earlier religious depictions. This psychological depth, coupled with an emerging naturalism, signals Bellini's pivotal role in shaping the Venetian Renaissance. As an early work, the Transfiguration bridges the late Gothic and early Renaissance styles, marking a crucial point in Bellini's artistic development. While it does not yet exhibit the full luminosity and softness of his later masterpieces, it lays the foundation for his mature approach to composition, light, and emotional depth. The painting remains an important testament to Bellini's evolving artistic vision and his contribution to the transformation of Venetian religious painting. Giovanni Bellini's The Pietà, also known as Christ's Body supported by the Virgin Mary and St. John the Evangelist, is a tempera-on-panel painting housed in the Accademia Carrara in Bergamo. This deeply emotive work exemplifies Bellini's early mastery of religious expression and composition, presenting a solemn yet profoundly human meditation on grief and sacrifice. At the center of the painting, the lifeless body of Christ is tenderly supported by the Virgin Mary and St. John the Evangelist. The composition is structured in a half-length format, drawing the viewer into the intimate sorrow of the scene. Christ's pale, emaciated body, marked by the wounds of his passion, contrasts with the richly colored garments of the mourning figures. The Virgin, cloaked in a deep blue robe, cradles her son with a sorrowful yet composed expression, embodying the ideal of dignified suffering. St. John, positioned to the right, gazes at Christ with an expression of deep lament, his hands gently supporting the Saviour's body. Bellini's use of color and light is particularly striking in this painting. The subdued palette, dominated by cool tones, enhances the somber mood of the scene. Soft, diffused lighting creates a sculptural effect, emphasizing the forms of the figures and lending them an almost tangible presence. The background is dark and indistinct, focusing attention on the central figures and intensifying the emotional weight of the composition. The influence of Andrea Mantegna, Bellini's brother-in-law, is evident in the rigid, almost sculptural rendering of Christ's body, as well as in the linear precision of the drapery. However, Bellini's approach is more delicate and lyrical, softening the severity of Mantegna's style with a greater emphasis on atmospheric depth and emotional nuance. The figures are imbued with a quiet introspection, moving beyond the dramatic expressiveness of earlier depictions of the Pietà to convey a profound sense of resignation and devotion. The painting's composition is reminiscent of Byzantine icons of the Threnos, lamentation, a theme that had a strong presence in Venetian devotional art. However, Bellini transforms this traditional motif through a heightened sense of realism and human emotion. The positioning of Christ's body, with his arm dangling lifelessly, reinforces the weight of death, while the tenderness of the Virgin's touch adds a note of maternal sorrow. Bellini's Pietà also demonstrates his early experiments with perspective and spatial depth. The figures are arranged in a shallow foreground, creating an intimate engagement with the viewer. The careful modeling of Christ's anatomy with subtle gradations of light and shadow foreshadows Bellini's later innovations in Venetian painting, where softness and atmospheric perspective became defining characteristics of his style. This Pietà is a powerful example of Bellini's ability to merge devotional intensity with artistic refinement. Through a masterful balance of composition, color, and emotion, the painting conveys both the physical suffering of Christ and the spiritual sorrow of those who mourn him. It stands as a testament to Bellini's early contributions to the Venetian Renaissance, marking a crucial step in his development toward a more naturalistic and emotionally resonant form of religious art.